Dear journalists, friends and colleagues, let me welcome you all to our press conference on climate vulnerabilities, Intensify floods in Bangladesh. Let me start with UN Secretary General's statement. He said, I urge every party to step up, pick up the pace, and deliver. The need is urgent, the rewards are great, the time is short, he told the delegates of COP29. Climate change, vulnerabilities, and impacts are not understood by anyone more than the people of Bangladesh. Let me inform you what has been happening in my country, Bangladesh. Climate vulnerabilities intensify due to cyclones, storms, tidal surge, coastal erosion, shifting of monsoon seasons, erratic rainfall, heat waves, sea level rise, reduced river flow, scarcity of drinking water, agricultural productivity severely impacted, disruption to aquatic ecosystem, flooding and waterlogging, loss of economic activities, rising waterborne health hazards. We have 72 kilometers of coastline with 50 million population. These coastal communities are suffering from livelihoods, climate change damage crops and reduce fish stock, undermine their income. Waterborne diseases increased, such as diarrhea, disproportionately affects women, children, and older generation. Water scarcity, saltwater intrusion forces women to fetch water from further distance, increasing their workload. Education, economic pressure, and increased household responsibility during climate-induced crisis lead to higher dropout rates among girls and students. Social vulnerability, displacement from disaster increased risks of gender-based violence is sheltered. Migration, environmental changes compel families to migrate, often leaving women to manage household in challenging conditions or exposing them to vulnerabilities in unfamiliar environments. Study conducted by Internal Displacement Monitoring Center revealed that on year 2014 to 2023, 14.7 million people from coastal area of Bangladesh already internally displaced. The World Bank predicted that by 2050, another 20 million coastal communities will be displaced due to climate change impacts. There is serious phenomena on the mental trauma or stress. The mental health of everybody severely impacted due to climate events. Let me inform you about devastating scenario of different cyclones that hit Bangladesh from 2007 to 2024. These are Cyclone Sidor in 2007, death was 3,447, affected population 8.9 million, and economic loss is 2 billion. Cyclone Ayla, death was 190, affected population 3.9 million, economic loss 630 million USD. Cyclone Rauno, 24 death, 1.3 affected population, 127 million economic loss. Cyclone Bulbul, 2019, 25 death, 2.1 million people affected, and $106 million economic loss. Cyclone Amphan, 26 death, 10 million people affected, 1,500 million US dollar losses. Cyclone Mocha, 3 death, 1.36 billion population affected, and $200 million economic loss. Cyclone Rimel in 2024, 18 death, 4.6 million people affected, and 673 million losses. These are cyclones, but we have also another climatic events, that is flood. Flood is in Bangladesh is well known to all of you as one of the most flood-affected countries in the world. I would like to bring a few examples of floods in the country. We had the most devastating floods in 1988. Almost the whole country was underwater for 3 to 4 weeks. Another big flood in 2004. Out of 64 districts, 39 districts affected, 36 million people affected, 700 deaths, $5 billion economic loss. In 2022 flood, 7.2 million people affected, 80 deaths, economic loss $1 billion. In 2024 flood, we have a Rimel, the cyclone, and also we have flood. In August 24, Bangladesh experienced severe flooding and landslides triggered by heavy rainfall and a surge of water released from a dam from neighboring country without any prior information to us. The flood affected multiple districts of Bangladesh are Feni, Kumilla, Noakhali, Lakhipur, Chattogram, Khagrachari, Moloibazar, Hobiganj, Brahmanbaria, Sylhet, and Cox's Bazar. These floods severely impacted life and livelihoods of more than 8 million people. The flood has taken 71 lives. Among the victims, 45 were men, 7 were women, and 19 were children. These numbers highlight the devastating impact of disaster, which has affected countless families and communities and leading to significant displacement of millions and extensive damage to agriculture and infrastructure. It was not an usual area of flooding. There have been no floods in this region of the country for the last 40 years. The flood cost more than $5 billion for the flood-affected communities. This flood is a combination of climate change and politics. As COP29 winds down, the global summit is currently marked by significant division and lack of substantial progress to critical issues. Despite intense negotiation, the summit has not yet delivered a comprehensive and ambitious agreement to address the climate crisis. When developing climate vulnerable countries are asking for $1 trillion to save lives of millions, in return, developed nations are offering trillion words and brackets. In the opening, I quoted UN Secretary General. He said that time is short. But we think there is no time left for us for discussion and negotiation. Our inaction would cost lives of millions in Bangladesh and low-lying countries in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, we are suffering now, and we know that definitely climate change will impact you tomorrow. So nobody is safe and secure from the adverse impacts of climate change. It is our common fate. Let's stop our discussion, negotiation, negotiation, and negotiation. We need to work together to save our Mother Earth. Thank you. Now I would like to open for question and answer. Our fellow colleague with us, Professor Ainun Nishat, Professor Saiful Islam, Roufa Khanum, and Shahin Alom. They are here. If you have any question, definitely we are trying to answer our best. Thank you. Please.
Thank you, Dr. Munjurul and Hannan Khan, for your brief presentation regarding the Bangladesh cyclone and flood. And how do we evaluate, how can Bangladesh overcome the losses in near future? But today we saw the news, again another low in the Bay of Bengal. So intensity of flood and cyclone is increasing. So what should we do, and what do we urge to the global community?
Thank you very much for your question. Actually, I like to supplement with Dr. Munjurul Hannan that country has been facing enormous challenges. And regarding the cyclone, this year we already have two cyclones, Cyclone Remal and Cyclone Dana. And then probably another low is forming. So how can we tackle this increasing, consistent, and increasing and frequent storms? And projections are it will be more intense in the future, particularly the precipitation and sea level rise, and also the wind, and also slow translation of the cyclone. So how can I do? We have developed National Adaptation Plan, and that has many aspects. Professor Nishat was the team leader of that study by Ministry of Environment Forestry. We have shown that we can do some adaptations like increasing number of shelters, strengthening the embankment, and afforastations. But I'd like to mention that there is a limit of this adaptation. And we are actually getting now losses and damages. And it will continue with the warming level. And the projection of IPCC and others shows that in future, it will be more devastating. Similarly, the precipitation and flood will increase. So this condition we are living, and there is also today we are talking about trillions of dollars needed for new NCQG, which involves adaptation and also the loss and damage. So hopefully developed country will limit the global emission so that we have to less adaptation and less loss and damage. And my colleagues, Nishat sir, can also further supplement.
Is there any question? Oh, please.
Hi, I don't know if you've seen, but the latest text is out, the latest draft for the quantified goal, and it says that the goal is 250 billion by 2035. What's your reaction on this? It's and from public and private finance. There's no mention of grants. I don't know if any of you can react. Thank you.
We have seen that like you. Nishat sir?
Yeah, let me ask my colleague, senior colleague, Professor Nishat, to respond to your question.
It is an interesting question. Definitely, if you talk about only the amount you quoted, it will be peanuts compared to the global need. But the other issue is, whatever is being committed, it should not sort of be duplication with the development funding, and how quickly the fund is released, that's a big question. The current procedure, whether by GCF or other entities, the process by which the fund is released is very slow and very cumbersome. The next point I would like to make, there are certain impacts of climate change which are manageable, which are doable, but certain things are not manageable, as for example, sea level rise and salinity. As of today, maybe 20, 30 centimeters, that is the average rise. But in the long run, and it is going to be very steep rise in the curve by which it is going to go up. So the entire coastal belt of Bangladesh is vulnerable to that. And these sort of cyclonic events are happening all over the world. Like Philippines is going to suffer from 4 cyclones within 2-3 weeks. So it's a question of not only the quantum of money, but also how quickly, how easily it will be available. And my next point would be technological support and capacity building process. Bangladesh being an LDC country, not for that, but the capacity is relatively low, how to approach for funding and other thing. Also the technological aspect to analyze this particular natural hazard. So as Munjurul Hannan has very correctly said about flood, I will just make one point and then stop, which is not only the flood, but its timing. So the flood, which is the north central part of Bangladesh, some part are still underwater. So this is an unusual thing. The eastern flood, which Munjurul Hannan made, which is happening after 30, 40 years, but possibly that kind of flood would happen very quickly. We had a big flood in 2017, Up to that point, the country was more or less self-sufficient in food. But since then, every year, Bangladesh has to buy huge amount of food with the exchange of precious foreign exchange, which the country can ill afford. Even this year, I think possibly government would be procuring 4.5 million metric ton, which would be about, say, 5%, so the 2 to 3%. But point is, the balance is very critical. So again, go back to your question. Well, amount of fund is very important, but how quickly we access to that and how effectively we can utilize it is equally important. Thank you.
Any more question? Okay.
Thank you, Munjurul sir, for your nice presentation. I'm also come from Bangladesh, so the outcome of this COP is very unaccepted, and I think that 250 billion is their commitment. We have seen that there have been lots of financial climate finance gap, what the commitment 100 billions. I think that this commitment will not be fulfilled for next several years. So Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world. So, and Bangladesh have a lot of funds in, like the climate trust fund. We already developed, and we developed within our revenue money. So what will be our instrumental measure how we can effectively use our internal resources to betterment for the communities who are living under threat of climate change? Thank you very much.
Roufa, can you please respond?
That's a very good question. And I know you personally, and you come from an area which is suffering from salinity, no drinking water for the people. Some people are moving out, and I'm afraid that rate of migration would be accelerated in coming days. Now, what you indicated, I fully appreciate that. While we wait and collect fund from the global level, we should utilize whatever resources we have in our country as effectively as possible. In fact, Bangladesh was pioneer in the world in developing their own fund base, which through Climate Change Trust Fund. And bilateral donors and multilateral donors established another fund called Climate Change Resilience Fund. Their effort was a total failure. World Bank had to shut down that window because they failed to manage it properly. Well, whereas the National Fund, Trust Fund, is still moving on in a lingering manner. Incidentally, I'm one of the trustees of that fund. So we are trying to revise the method or areas where we give the funding. So we should prioritize. We should put the money over there. So salinity increase and absence of or lack of proper drinking water is a big issue that should receive support. The other area that should support, in my view, immediately is agriculture sector research. We say that we need 5 types of new cultivars: flood tolerant and drought tolerant, salinity tolerant and heat tolerant, and short duration to minimize the risk. Incidentally, when this year the eastern side of Bangladesh, is a small country, was suffering from flood, the western side was suffering from drought. And this year we had 5 or 6 depressions and cyclone warning. So one depression of the cyclonic weather caused the flood on the eastern side of Bangladesh, and the other cyclone which caused heavy rainfall in western side, the people welcomed the western side event because they didn't have any water or any rainfall. So the climate change is not only going to inflict a number of hazards or disaster. We have listed 14 disasters in our adaptation plan, but point is timing of the disaster, because our weather and climate is strongly related to the cropping pattern. So if there is rainfall, heavy rainfall in March and April, we suffer a lot. June, July, we are happy. but then in September, October, that's dangerous for the country. So I would say we have prioritized where the funds should go. I hope the government to take steps to follow those guidelines. Thank you.
Let me ask my colleague, Professor Saiful, to supplement your question.
I just like to supplement with sir that not only flood, drought, we also see heat wave, devastating heat wave. And every flood and cyclone also bring cascade of disaster. For example, after cyclone, we see precipitation, heavy precipitation, and then we see it impact the agriculture and health sector. So multi-hazard, like cascade disaster, combined disaster is now getting more and more frequent. And in future, we'll see this kind of issues. So tackling this multi-hazard will be another challenge for the future. And as Professor Nishat sir said, that we have limited resource. And the funding that we have seen, and in the paper actually, we have get access to this fund will take many, many years with modality and transparency, all these things, and that will come. So it is urgently needed for developing country, vulnerable country particularly, to access this fund as a grant, not as a further debt. Thanks.
Ma'am, going back to your question or the comments you made, how do we feel about the figure that has been offered to us? You see, if you going back to the history and if you evaluate the history of releasing fund, then 100 billion by 2020, and from there this is 2024, in that case we should have 400 billion in our account, if this is the case. But where is that 400 billion? So this is a commitment. Commitment does not necessarily mean that the realization. The realization is too slow in terms of commitment. And at the same time, if you look at the Green Climate Fund, the modalities, what they have from our country, from Bangladesh, we have experience of getting an approved project after 9 years. It took 9 years to get a project. When we developed the project, the context, and after 9 years, the context is totally different. And the fund you are accessing and mobilizing for the people, I'm sure by this time they are already displaced from there, and you will not get that people to support them. So that is also another area of attention by the UNFCCC, particularly because they are the guardian of the Green Climate Fund ultimately, and the Loss and Damage Fund, Adaptation Fund. I mean, all these funds, this COP process is the guardian. So they should have a proper and clear access mechanism for the climate vulnerable countries to access the fund easily, and not like 9 years or 10 years to be waited to get the fund. If this is the case, then even if you provide 1 trillion and have a tight and stringent rules and regulation for the access, nobody can access anything. Thank you. Any question? You can conclude, or I can request my Professor Ainun. Oh, okay, please.
10 minutes.
Thank you so much, Lindsay Cook, Quaker United Nations Office. I wanted to ask if Bangladesh has hopes for the ICJ advisory opinion that's coming, and if Bangladesh was able to bring a strong statement into that as a country. Thank you.
I cannot get you. Can you repeat? What is your question?
There is to be an upcoming advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on the state's obligations to act on climate change, hoping to strengthen what we already have. I'm wondering if for Bangladesh that's a piece of hope for you, and if you're able to put in a strong statement.
You are talking about the climate justice? Which fund you are talking about? Which mechanism? I'm not aware of that mechanism. Oh, International Court of Justice. I think then it would be a conflicting situation between Bangladesh and the COP process if we go to the International Court of Justice for climate victims. But if needed, definitely Bangladesh will go to the International Court of Justice to save our people because of the climate vulnerabilities. Definitely, why not? Thanks.
Oh.
No, yeah, go. Farah. 1 minute.
1 minute.
We have 1 minute, but.
Thank you so much, sir. So I have a question on loss and damage. So as we know, we have been, the LDC and everyone, we have been fighting for a window for loss and damage under the NCQG document. But in the latest text, there is no such mentioning about loss and damage in the whole document. But we know that Bangladesh has been a very big champion and advocating for loss and damage. So I just would like to know what should be our stand and our remark on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, these are lost and damaged. So that's why you didn't see that word in the NCQZ text.
Can I add one thing? I think Bangladesh and LDC position is we are not going to loss and damage into the adaptation and mitigation. It should be separate. Thank you.
Yeah, that is. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.